A single dad trying to buy a used truck for work is mocked at a luxury dealership until a mysterious woman in jeans steps in and buys him the very car he was humiliated for wanting. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know. The morning air was still, the kind of gray quiet that settled over tired neighborhoods before the world fully woke. Jesse Navarro stood in his narrow driveway, hood popped on a borrowed van that coughed like it had one foot in the grave. Frost clung to the edges of the windshield. His fingers, raw from the cold, fumbled with a wrench that had seen better days, just like everything else in his life. "Dad, do you think the van'll make it to school?" Mateo's voice piped up from the porch, muffled slightly behind a scarf too big for his small frame. Jesse straightened, his back groaning in quiet protest. "She's got one more trip in her," he said, trying to sound confident. The truth? He wasn't sure the van would make it to the end of the block. But a dad's job was to keep hope alive, especially when there wasn't much else to give. Mateo, 9 and wiser than most kids his age, nodded solemnly and tightened the straps on his backpack. He never asked for new things. Never whined when Jesse said, "Maybe next week." But Jesse felt it every time like a weight behind his rib show his boy deserved more than patchwork promises and half-tank mornings. They loaded into the van, and Jesse turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then settled into a reluctant growl. He exhaled in relief, gripping the wheel with fingers still smeared in grease. "We'll drop you off, then I'll head to the shop," Jesse said. "You got your homework?" "In the front pocket?" Mateo replied, then hesitated. "You're still going to look at cars today, right?" Jesse gave a tight smile. "Yeah, just going to see what's out there." It wasn't a lie. Not really. He had an appointment at a dealership that promised reliable trade-ins. What they didn't promise was affordability, and Jesse had exactly $17 left in his checking account after rent. But he'd go. He had to. The van wouldn't hold out forever, and he couldn't keep borrowing rides. Mateo needed safe wheels. He needed stability. And Jesse? He needed one small win, just one, to feel like he was still doing this right. As the van rolled through cracked streets and stop signs, Jesse glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. No matter how tired he felt, how tight the days became, he knew this much. For Mateo, he'd keep going. Always. Mateo bounced in his seat, his sneakers kicking rhythmically against the worn floor mat of the van. "Do you think it'll have one of those touch screens? Like with maps and music and stuff?" he asked, eyes wide with anticipation. Jesse forced a smile, keeping one hand steady on the wheel and the other resting near the trembling gear shift. "Maybe," he said. "We'll see what they've got." They were 10 minutes from the dealership, and Mateo had no idea his dad's chest felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Jesse had spent the better part of last night calculating, recalculating, and mentally trimming groceries, utilities, and gas just to see if a down payment was even possible. And this morning before the sun came up he'd scraped together what little he had. 2 folded 20s, a 10, and a few wrinkled singles sat in an envelope under the driver's seat. The van rattled as they pulled into the dealership parking lot, its sign arching overhead like a monument to dreams just out of reach. Northridge Auto, where luxury meets life. "Whoa," Mateo whispered, staring out the window. Sleek cars gleamed under soft spotlights, and glass doors opened with a polished hush as sharply dressed employees moved with practiced smiles. Jesse pulled into the far corner of the lot, away from the line of spotless vehicles. He turned off the engine, letting the silence settle between them for a beat. "Okay, buddy," he said, turning around. "Here's the deal. You stay close, don't touch anything, and just look. Today we're just looking." Mateo nodded eagerly, already unbuckling. "I got it." Jesse hesitated before getting out. He reached under the seat and pulled out the envelope, the corner already soft from being handled too many times. He slipped it into his back pocket like it was nothing, like it wasn't every dollar he had to his name. As they approached the main entrance, Jesse couldn't help but feel the eyes on them, the salesman by the showroom window, pausing mid-sip of his coffee, the receptionist's smile tightening slightly. Jesse kept his chin up. He wasn't here to impress anyone, he was here for his kid. And that was reason enough to walk through those gleaming glass doors, no matter how small his bank account was. The glass doors slid open with a whisper, and Jesse stepped inside, Mateo at his side, eyes bright and full of wonder. The showroom was spotless floor like polished ice, air smelling faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Cars sat on display like works of art, shining under overhead lights, their price tags tucked discreetly on the dashboards, like secrets meant to be discovered only by the right kind of people. Jesse took a breath, steadying himself. He had called ahead about a trade-in special older vehicles, high mileage but affordable. A man named Rick had said to stop by. Jesse scanned the room, trying to match a voice to a face. "Can I help you?" A tall man in a crisp navy blazer approached, flashing a practiced smile. His name tag read Rick Danvers, sales manager. "Yeah," Jesse said, shifting uncomfortably. "I spoke to you earlier, Jesse Navarro. I'm here about the used SUVs, the trade-ins?" Rick looked him up and down, a flicker of recognition or maybe judgment passing through his eyes. "Ah, right, sure," he said, tone already losing its polish. "They're out back. We don't usually show those in the main lot." Mateo tugged at Jesse's sleeve. "Dad, can we look at that one first?" He pointed to a sleek black SUV near the center of the floor. "The thing looked like it could drive through a snowstorm without so much as a flinch." Rick chuckled not kindly. "That one's a fully loaded Crestmore LX. You'd need at least 65 grand to drive that off the lot." He turned his gaze to Jesse, smirking. "Bit out of range, don't you think?" Jesse's stomach twisted. He felt the words like a slap, especially with Mateo standing right there. "We're just looking," Jesse said quietly, putting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Sure you are," Rick muttered, already turning toward another customer in slacks and shiny shoes. Mateo looked up at his dad, brows scrunched. "Did we do something wrong?" Jesse crouched down, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, buddy. Some people just don't know how to be nice." But even as he said it, his chest felt hollow. The envelope in his pocket suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds, and for the first time, Mateo seemed to sense the difference between what they had and what they didn't. Before Jesse could usher Mateo toward the back lot, a voice broke through the awkward silence behind them, clear, calm, and unexpectedly warm. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Did I just hear you say that SUV's out of range?" Jesse turned. Standing a few feet away was a woman in worn jeans, a forest green jacket zipped to the collar, and a messy braid slung over one shoulder. She didn't look like the rest of the dealership's clientelano designer heels, no expensive handbag, no jewelry. But her posture was steady, and her eyes sharp and kind were locked on Rick. Rick blinked. Yes ma'am, that Crestmore is one of our high-end models." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good. I'll take it." Jesse frowned, unsure if he'd heard right. Rick straightened, confusion flickering across his face. "I am sorry, you want to buy the Crestmore?" "Yes," she said, already stepping closer to the SUV. "I'll pay in full, but I'd like to add a note." Rick blinked, flustered. "A note?" The woman turned to Jesse and Mateo now. "For your son," she said, voice softening. "If that's all right." Jesse stared at her, trying to make sense of what was happening. "A what?" "Ma'am, we weren't asking for anything. I can't let you." She raised a hand gently, not to cut him off, but to keep the moment from spiraling. "I know. You weren't asking. That's exactly why I'm doing it." Mateo, silent this whole time, looked up at Jesse, then back at the woman. "Are you buying us a car?" The woman knelt, looking him right in the eyes. "No, kiddo. I'm investing in a future that deserves better wheels." Rick stood there, speechless. Jesse opened his mouth, then closed it again. His pride warred with the weight of reality, and the ache in his chest that someone, for once, had seen them not as a charity case, but as people worth showing up for. "Why?" Jesse finally asked, his voice quiet. She smiled again. Because I know what it's like to have nothing and still keep going anyway. Jessie watched the woman stand, brushing her hands on the thighs of her jeans like she'd just finished something simple, folding laundry. Maybenote just dropped tens of thousands of dollars on a complete stranger. I'm Claire, she said, offering her hand. Claire Bennett. Jessie hesitated, staring at her outstretched fingers like they were made of glass. It wasn't that he didn't know how to shake a hand, it was that everything about this moment felt off-script. Surreal. He finally took it, his palm rough and calloused against hers. Jessie Navarro, he said quietly. And this is my son, Mateo. Hi, Mateo said, half in awe. He stood close to his dad, eyes darting between them like he was trying to piece together a puzzle without the box lid. Claire crouched again, so she was eye level with the boy. You've got good taste in cars, Mateo. That one's reliable, strong, and built to last just like your dad. Mateo smiled, bashful but proud. Jessie's throat tightened at the words. Compliments like that didn't come often, not about him anyway. Still, suspicion prickled under Jessie's skin. No one just did things like this. Not without a catch. I appreciate what you're doing, but this is too much, he said, his voice low. We're not looking for handouts. Claire rose, her gaze steady but not condescending. Good, because I'm not offering one. Jessie frowned. I've been on the receiving end of pity, she continued. Didn't like it, this isn't that. I saw a moment that didn't sit right with me, so I changed it, that's all. She shrugged, like it really was that simple. But nothing in Jessie's life had ever been that easy. People didn't just step in, not like this. He studied her. No gold watch. No designer label. Her jacket looked a few winters old. But there was something polished underneath, an air of quiet confidence, like someone who knew exactly who she was and didn't need to prove it. Jessie swallowed, unsure whether to trust the kindness or brace for the catch. Why us? Claire just smiled. Because you didn't ask. Jessie stood there, one hand resting protectively on Mateo's shoulder, the other still half raised from the handshake he barely remembered completing. His heart was racing, not from excitement but from confusion, disbelief, and something else he didn't want to name. Hope, maybe. Claire seemed to sense his hesitation. She leaned lightly against the hood of the Crestmore, arms crossed casually, like this wasn't a life-altering moment but just another Saturday errand. I get it, she said. You're wondering what the angle is. Jessie gave a quiet snort. Something like that. There isn't one. She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not trying to sponsor you or fix your life. I just saw something that needed to be set right, and I could. So I did. Mateo's hand tugged gently at Jessie's. Dad, can we keep it, just this once? Jessie looked down at him, at the hope shimmering just beneath his voice. It nearly undid him. He turned back to Claire, his jaw tense. If I say yes, you're not going to pop up in 6 months asking for payments, right? Claire laughed, not mocking, genuine. No, I'm not here to make your life harder. In fact, she said, straightening, why don't we make a day out of it? I haven't had a decent Saturday in ages. You two seem like good company. Jessie blinked. You want to hang out with us? I just dropped a car into your life. Might as well make sure it fits, she said with a small smirk. Come on, lunch is on me, you pick. Jessie looked down at Mateo, who was now practically vibrating with excitement. Can we get cheeseburgers and milkshakes? Claire smiled. Absolutely. He looked back at her, still unsure how he'd ended up here, standing inside a luxury dealership with a stranger offering them lunch and a brand new SUV like it was a birthday party, and she was handing out goodie bags. Jessie let out a slow breath, the kind that felt like releasing 5 years of tension all at once. All right, he said finally. But just lunch. And I'm picking the spot. Claire grinned. Deal. The little burger joint Jessie picked sat on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just red vinyl booths, faded jukebox, and the smell of sizzling onions clinging to the air like an old friend. Claire didn't seem fazed. In fact, she ordered a double cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake like she'd been coming there for years. No requests for substitutions. No menu Googling. Just a woman who knew how to make herself at home in unfamiliar places. After lunch, with stomachs full and smiles easier, they walked across the street to the park. Jessie hadn't planned on staying out this long, but Mateo was glowing, practically skipping beside Claire, who didn't seem to mind the cold wind tugging at her braid. The carousel was still running half slow, half charming, paint chipped from years of spinning joy into quiet towns like theirs. "Can we go?" Mateo asked, already bouncing in place. Claire glanced at Jessie. "Come on, Dad, what do you think?" Jessie hesitated, then handed over a couple of dollars. "One ride," he said with mock sternness, but the corner of his mouth curved up. Claire and Mateo climbed onto the platform, Mateo claiming a proud red stallion and Claire choosing a lopsided giraffe. As the ride started turning, Jessie leaned against the fence, watching them. Claire laughed as the carousel picked up its slow rhythm, tossing her head back when Mateo shouted something silly. Her laugh wasn't loud or polished, it was warm, messy, real. The sound hit Jessie in a place he hadn't realized was still sore, a place that had been quiet for too long. She didn't have to be here. That thought kept circling. She'd done her good deed. She could have driven off and never looked back. But here she was riding plastic animals with his kid like it was the best part of her week. Jessie shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, trying to keep the strange warmth in his chest from rising too fast. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just gratitude. But as he watched Mateo throw his head back in pure, unfiltered joy, and Claire mirror his laugh like they shared the same heartbeat for a momentha, knew something had shifted, and it scared the hell out of him. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden haze over the park as if the sky had decided to join in on the good mood. Kids darted between booths with sticky fingers and wide grins, the distant roar of a roller coaster echoing like thunder wrapped in laughter. Somewhere nearby, a pop song played from a battered speaker, its rhythm pulsing with life. Jessie sat on a bench, one leg stretched out, watching Claire and Mateo race toward the cotton candy stand like they'd known each other for years. Claire's braid bounced as she ran, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon, and Mateo looked lighter than Jessie had seen him in months. Maybe years. When they returned, Claire handed Jessie a cone of cotton candy that looked like it had swallowed a cloud. "Blue raspberry," she said, as if she already knew his favorite. "Figured you were more classic than wild cherry." He raised an eyebrow. "You figuring me out now?" "Maybe just a little," she said, grinning as she tore off a fluffy piece for herself. They sat there for a while, the three of them, sticky fingers and sun-warmed cheeks, no rush to be anywhere else. Mateo climbed up onto the bench beside Jessie and leaned against him, sighing contentedly. "This is the best day ever," he said, not even looking up from his cotton candy. Jessie glanced at Claire. She smiled softly, and for a moment there was no dealership, no price tags, no hidden questions, just them, like a snapshot of something simple and good. "You sure you're not secretly a magician?" Jessie asked her. Claire chuckled. "Not unless magicians run on caffeine and a lot of awkward phases." He laughed, and it surprised him how easy it was, how natural. She wasn't what he expected. Not when she bought the car. Not now, sitting beside him like a piece of a puzzle he didn't know was missing. As the sun dipped lower and the carousel spun again in the distance, Jessie felt the sparkle in the air, that gentle shift when something ordinary starts to feel like the beginning of something extraordinary. They found a quiet spot on a hill overlooking the park, just beyond the noise and flashing lights. The sound of roller coasters and laughter drifted in the distance, softened by the breeze. Mateo had passed out on the grass, arms splayed, face smudged with cotton candy and sun. Jessie tucked his hoodie under his son's head and sat beside Claire, their shoulders almost touching, but not quite. For a moment, they said nothing. Just watched the sky shift from gold to soft lavender. Claire broke the silence first. "He's a great kid." Jessie smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, he is." She looked at him, sensing something deeper. "You okay?" He took a breath, long and slow, like the kind you take before jumping into cold water. I lost his mom 4 years ago. Car accident. 1 minute she was there, and then she wasn't. Claire's expression softened. I'm sorry. Thanks. He looked out over the horizon. I wasn't ready for any of it. Suddenly, it was just me and Mateo and a mountain of bills. I was working construction back then. Long hours, not much money. I'd come home and he'd be asleep on the couch, waiting for me with his shoes still on. Claire didn't speak, just listened, her presence quiet and steady. I got injured on site 2 years ago, back and knee. Nothing dramatic, but enough to put me out of work for months. That's when everything really unraveled. Sold the house. Moved into a duplex. Took whatever work I could find. Grocery runs, deliveries, odd jobs. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes tired. I've spent years trying to keep things from falling apart. Trying to give him something close to normal. He deserves that. But most days, it feels like I'm just patching holes in a sinking boat. Claire looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. You're still afloat, though. He chuckled, dry and low. Some days, I don't know how. Maybe, she said gently, because you refuse to let him go under. That's something most people wouldn't have the strength to do. For a moment, Jesse let the words sink in. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the grass around them. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. For the first time in a long while, the weight didn't feel so heavy. The sky had darkened to a deep cobalt, the kind that comes just before stars start to peek through. Mateo snored softly a few feet away, curled under Jesse's hoodie like a cocoon. The park had begun to quiet, families trickling toward their cars, vendors shutting down their stands. But Jesse and Claire stayed on the hill, neither ready to let the day end. Claire leaned back on her elbows, eyes fixed on the sky. You ever feel like you're living a life that doesn't belong to you? She asked suddenly. Jesse turned to her, brow furrowed. What do you mean? She hesitated, then let out a soft breath. My family owns a company, a big one, cars mostly. Manufacturing, design, tech, all of it. I was raised in boardrooms and dinner parties, told I'd take the reins one day. Went to all the right schools, got engaged to the right guy. Took the right job. From the outside, I was on track to have this perfect life. Jesse studied her. What happened? Claire gave a small, tired laugh. Turns out the perfect life felt like a straitjacket. My fiancé didn't want a partner, he wanted a brand. Someone to stand beside him at fundraisers and smile for magazines. And the job. It paid well, but I hated it. Long days of pretending, of saying yes when I wanted to scream no. So one day, I just left. You left everything? Jesse asked. Not all at once. At first I just took a leave of absence. Said I needed to clear my head. But it's been 8 months. I'm still gone. She picked a blade of grass and rolled it between her fingers. Sometimes I drive around to places like this, trying to remember what real life looks like, what real people sound like. And today? Jesse asked, voice low. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. Today felt real. You and Mateo. You didn't want anything from me, you just were. And I needed that more than I realized. Jesse looked at her, really looked. Not as the woman who bought him a car or cracked jokes on a carousel, but someone just as tired of pretending as he was. Then stay real, he said. It suits you. The water ride was Mateo's idea. The kind of spontaneous, slightly chaotic suggestion only a 9-year-old could make at dusk, when the air was cooling fast and common sense started to fade with the sun. Come on, he begged, tugging at both Jesse's and Claire's hands. It's our last ride. You promised. I said maybe, Jesse protested, but his resolve was already cracking at the sight of Mateo's toothy grin and the pleading tilt of his head. Then Claire chimed in with a smirk. Don't be scared, Jesse. What's a little water? And that was how the three of them ended up squeezed together in a faded logboat, drifting toward a dark tunnel lit with cheesy glowing lights and the sound of fake thunder. Jessie sat in the back, with Mateo in the middle and Clare in the front. This poor attempt at protecting them from the inevitable splash. The ride lurched forward, and all three of them screamed not from fear, but from the sheer, unfiltered joy of letting go. The first drop was small, just a teaser. They came out of the tunnel soaked at the knees, Mateo laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Clare wiped water from her face, her braid plastered to her shoulder, and turned back to Jessie with a mock glare. "You said you had my back." "I said no such thing," Jessie replied, grinning wider than he had in weeks. Then came the big climb. The ride ticked upward, one clunky gear at a time. Clare twisted around. "If we go down and I scream louder than your kid, I want a hot chocolate." "Deal," Jessie said. They plunged. Water exploded over them like a wave breaking against rock. Jessie instinctively reached forward, steadying Mateo with one arm, and when they leveled out, all three of them were soaked from head to toe, laughing like fools. When they stepped off, dripping and breathless, Jessie watched Clare shake the water from her sleeves. Mateo beside her, bouncing as he recounted every detail of the drop. She didn't look out of place. She didn't flinch at the mess, or hold back her laughter. She just fit. And for the first time, Jessie let the thought creep in. Maybe this doesn't have to be just a one-day thing. The sun had dipped low enough to turn the sky soft amber, casting a warm glow across the park as the last rides wound down. They strolled toward the exit slowly, shoes squishing from the water ride, clothes damp but spirits lifted. Jessie carried Mateo's hoodie, still soggy, draped over his shoulder, while Mateo trotted ahead in damp socks, pointing out everything he'd missed earlier like it was a brand new park. Clare walked beside Jessie, quiet now. Her earlier laughter softened into something calmer, like the kind that stays with you after the moment passes. In her hand she held her phone, fingers idly tapping the screen. She wasn't texting or scrolling, just holding on to it. As they passed a cotton candy stand, Mateo ran back toward them, beaming. "Dad, look!" he said, and without warning he jumped onto Jessie's back. Jessie caught him mid-laugh, groaning theatrically. "Geez, you've been eating too many fries, kid," he said, lifting Mateo higher. "That's muscle," Mateo declared. And right then, Clare snapped the photo. She hadn't meant to. Her thumb hit the shutter by instinct, catching the exact second Jessie looked up at Mateo, his smile soft and real, his hands steady, his whole face lit with a joy he probably hadn't seen in his own reflection for years. She didn't say anything at first, just glanced down at the screen. Her heart caught. It was a moment. Pure, unfiltered, beautiful. "You've got to see this," she said, stepping closer and holding the phone out. Jessie took it, glancing at the image. His breath hitched just slightly. It wasn't about lighting or angles, it was the look in Mateo's eyes, the way his arms wrapped tight around Jessie's shoulders. The way Jessie was smiling, really smiling, without the usual guard behind it. It was a picture of a man living, not surviving. A dad present, not just providing. "That's a good one," he said, clearing his throat. Clare met his eyes. "That's what you look like when you're not carrying the world." Jessie held her gaze for a moment, and something flickered between them. Something unspoken, but understood. And for once, he didn't feel the need to hide from it. They ended the day back where it started, at the corner booth of the burger joint, shoes drying near the heater vents and the scent of grilled onions floating through the air like comfort. The place was quieter now, just a few locals lingering over late meals and coffee refills. Outside, the sky had deepened to navy, street lights flickering to life one by one. Jessie sat across from Clare, Mateo curled up in the booth beside him, chin tucked to his chest, half asleep with ketchup still on his cheek. The boy had run himself into the ground sugar, laughter, and adrenaline, finally giving way to silence. Clare sipped her milkshake, her elbows on the table, and looked at Jessie with that same steady calm she'd carried all day. "So," she said, voice low, "can I ask you something kind of personal?" Jessie raised an eyebrow but nodded. "After today? I think you've earned that right." She hesitated, spinning her straw slowly between her fingers. "Do you ever think about what you want? I mean not just for Mateo. For you. The question caught him off guard. Not because it was complicated, but because it was so rare. Most people asked about bills, school drop-off times, or how he was holding up. No one asked him if he dreamed anymore. He leaned back in the booth, looking past her toward the window, as if the answer might be waiting outside. I used to, he said finally. Before everything. I wanted to open my own garage, do restoration work. Old cars, custom rebuilds. Not just oil changes and tire rotations. Claire listened quietly, no judgment, no interruption. But then life happened, he continued. And that dream started to feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. Now, I'm just trying to keep Mateo's lunchbox full and the lights on. Claire nodded, letting the silence settle for a beat before speaking. But you still think about it, don't you? Even if just for a second now and then. Jesse's eyes dropped to his son, sleeping peacefully beside him. He gave a quiet smile. Yeah, I guess I do. Claire looked at him like she already knew the truth, that some part of him, buried but not broken, was still reaching for more. The sky outside had shifted again, now cloaked in a soft indigo with stars beginning to scatter like sparks across velvet. The burger joint's neon sign buzzed gently against the windows as Claire stood from the booth, brushing the crumbs from her jeans. All right, she said, slipping her phone into her jacket pocket. One last surprise before we call it a night. Jesse arched an eyebrow, still half lost in the quiet of their earlier conversation. You mean today wasn't full of enough surprises already? Claire smirked. You're about to be spoiled. Mateo stirred from his nap at the word surprise, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. Wait, what is it? More rides? Nope, she said, tousling his hair. Even better. 15 minutes later, they were led through a side gate at the edge of the park by a cheerful young staff member wearing a headset and name badge. Jesse said nothing, just exchanged a skeptical glance with Claire as they were ushered past a small crowd and up a roped-off path. They arrived at a secluded platform built above the park's tree line, complete with cushioned chairs, fleece blankets, and a tray of complimentary snacks waiting under soft golden lights. Mateo's eyes lit up. Whoa, this is like VIP. Claire winked. Because it is VIP. Jesse crossed his arms, eyeing the setup. How did you? I called in a favor, she said lightly, settling into one of the chairs. I used to work with someone who helps with park operations. Thought you two deserved a front row seat to end the night right. Jesse didn't sit right away. His eyes lingered on her a second longer than before. You sure you just used to work with them? Claire looked up at him, that calm smile still there. But now Jesse saw the flicker of something else underneath. Composure, familiarity with this kind of treatment. Connections most people didn't have. She didn't answer directly, just patted the chair beside her. Stop asking questions and enjoy the view, Navarro. And as the first firework cracked through the sky in a shower of color, Jesse sat down, the doubt simmering quietly inside him. There was more to Claire Bennett than jeans and kindness, and he was starting to want to know all of it. The fireworks painted the night sky in bursts of gold and crimson, echoing in the air like distant thunder. Mateo leaned against Jesse, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, completely mesmerized. Jesse barely watched the show. His eyes kept drifting to Claire, her face lit briefly in color with each explosion, her expression calm but distant, as if part of her was somewhere else. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and something in her posture shifted just slightly, but enough for Jesse to notice. She stood, brushing her hands down her jeans, and offered a quick, tight smile. I'll be right back, she said, already turning away. Jesse watched her walk to the far end of the viewing platform, stepping down the small wooden stairs toward the tree line. She raised the phone to her ear and began speaking low and fast. The wind carried her voice in pieces. I told them I needed more time. No, not yet. I know how important the quarter-end numbers are, but I said I'd handle it. Jessie stiffened. Her voice had changed. No longer relaxed and casual, it was crisp, measured, professional. I'll review the presentation deck in the morning. Push the call to 10. And don't let my father get involved. A beat of silence. Yes, I'm aware it's his company. No, that doesn't mean he gets to dictate how I live my life. That was enough. Jesse looked away, heart suddenly tight in his chest. The fireworks kept booming overhead, but they sounded dull now. Distant. Mateo hadn't noticed he was too lost in the spectacle, but Jesse was somewhere else entirely, piecing things together he hadn't wanted to think about until now. This wasn't just a woman with a kind heart and a little extra cash. Claire wasn't taking time off. She was running something. Someone. And someone with power. Wealth. A last name that probably mattered in places Jesse had never stepped foot in. She returned minutes later, her smile back in place, her expression smooth. But Jesse could barely meet her eyes. Because now he knew Claire Bennett was hiding more than just her past. She was hiding who she really was. They walked back to the car in near silence. The park had emptied out, leaving only echoes of laughter and the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Mateo was asleep in Jesse's arms, his weight warm and familiar, head tucked against Jesse's shoulder. The boy had burned through every ounce of energy and joy in him, and Jesse wished he could live in that simplicity a little longer. But he couldn't shake what he'd heard. Claire opened the passenger door for him, careful not to wake Mateo as Jesse settled him into the back seat. She leaned against the car, arms folded, gaze soft but alert. She knew. Of course she did. Jesse didn't hide his unease well. He closed the door gently, turned to face her. "So, that call," he said, keeping his voice quiet but firm. "You want to tell me what that was really about?" Claire didn't flinch. If anything, she looked relieved that he finally asked. "I work for my family's company," she said. "Bennett Automotive. My grandfather started it. My father grew it into something massive. I was supposed to take over eventually." Jesse let out a slow breath. The name rang a bell, of course it did. Claire wasn't just rich. She came from that kind of rich. "I figured it was something like that," he muttered, shoving his hands in his jacket pockets. Claire's voice was softer now, almost cautious. "I didn't lie to you, Jesse. I just didn't lead with it. Because when I do, that's all people see. The money, the name, the connections. Suddenly I'm not a person anymore. I'm an opportunity. Or a threat." He met her eyes then, something sharp and conflicted flickering behind his. "So what am I?" She didn't look away. "You're the first person in a long time who treated me like I'm just Claire. You didn't want anything from me. You actually listened." Mateo made me laugh. "You made me feel human again." He said nothing, just stared at her under the soft glow of the parking lot lights. "I didn't help you today because I felt guilty or wanted to feel good," she continued. "I did it because it reminded me what real connection feels like. And I've missed that more than I ever missed a corner office or some boardroom full of people pretending to care." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of nearby streetlights and the slow ticking of Jesse's cooling engine. Finally, he exhaled. Okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah," he said. "But next time, start with your real name, then offer me a milkshake." Claire smiled, quiet and full of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Deal. The ride home was quiet. The kind of stillness that settles after a day packed so full it leaves no room for anything more. The streets were mostly empty, lit by flickering streetlights and the occasional glow of passing headlights. Inside the SUV, the air was warm, soft music playing low from the Radiosome old soul tune that hummed in the background like a lullaby. Mateo had finally surrendered to sleep again, curled up in the back seat, his head resting against Claire's arm. She didn't move, didn't flinch or try to shift. She just let him stay there, her hand gently cradling his shoulder, as if the boy had always belonged there. Jesse drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the console, his gaze flicking from the road to the rearview mirror. Every now and then, his eyes found their shizen, peaceful, in a way Jesse hadn't seen in years. And Claire, quiet, thoughtful, not a trace of pretense left in her. Up ahead, just before the turn for their neighborhood, a burst of color lit the sky. Then, another. And another. Fireworks? Claire murmured, glancing up through the windshield. Jesse nodded. Town fair finale. Forgot they were doing the big show tonight. He pulled over just past the hill, where they could see the display unfold in full view. He shut the engine off, and for a while, none of them spoke. They just watched gold, crimson, green explosions cracking open the sky, one after the next, like the world was celebrating something only they understood. Claire leaned her head back against the seat, eyes reflecting the bursts above. "This has been one of the best days I've had in a long time," she said softly. Jesse looked over at her, his voice low. "Me too." Another boom echoed above them, a waterfall of silver, sparkling through the air. Mateo stirred in his sleep, but didn't wake. Claire reached down to gently brush the hair from his forehead, and Jesse watched the movement like it meant something more than it seemed, because it did. In that quiet, fire-lit moment, nothing had to be said. Not about money, or past pain, or what came next. Between them, in the hush and the glow, was something real, fragile, possible. And Jesse knew this night wasn't just something to remember. It was the start of something worth holding on to. The next morning, the sunlight felt different, too bright, too sharp, like it was trying to shake them out of a dream they weren't ready to leave. Jesse stood on the porch with a chipped mug of coffee, watching as Mateo chased a soccer ball barefoot across the dew-slicked grass, laughter echoing in the early light. It had only been a day. Just one long, impossible day. And yet it felt like something bigger had settled in something that didn't quite fit into their usual life of careful budgets and silent mornings. Claire hadn't texted. She hadn't called. Jesse told himself that was fine, that it made sense. She had her world to go back to, boardrooms, deadlines, and a last name that opened more doors than he could count. Yesterday had been an accident. A beautiful, impossible accident. And now? Now reality was setting back in, slow and quiet, like fog creeping over a field. He didn't tell Mateo that Claire might not come back. Didn't tell him that sometimes people walk into your life just long enough to remind you what you're missing, then leave before you get used to it. Later that afternoon, Jesse and Mateo returned to the dealership to pick up the title paperwork for the SUV. Rick, the smug salesman from before, didn't say much this time. Just handed over the folder and mumbled something about Ms. Bennett's assistant already taking care of everything. Jesse thanked him with a tight nod and turned to leave. But on the way out, he paused. The SUV sat in the lot, clean and polished, waiting like it belonged to them. Jesse ran a hand along the smooth paint, heart heavy. It wasn't just the car. It was the memory now tied to it. A memory of fireworks and cotton candy and laughter that didn't feel borrowed for once. He helped Mateo climb into the back, buckled him in, then slid into the driver's seat. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Mateo asked, eyes wide, hopeful. Jesse hesitated, staring through the windshield. "I don't know, Bud." He wanted to believe yes, but he'd learned a long time ago not to bet on maybes, and as they pulled out of the lot, the space beside him felt just a little too empty. The following morning unfolded like any other quiet, routine, normal. Jesse dropped Mateo off at school, then headed back to the duplex, the smell of burnt toast still clinging to his flannel shirt. The house was still, sunlight slanting through the blinds and casting long strips of light across the living room floor. He tossed his keys on the counter, made a half-hearted attempt at cleaning up the breakfast dishes, and collapsed onto the couch with a sigh that felt heavier than he meant it to. The magic was gone. The SUV sat out front, like proof that the day had happened. But everything else, Claire's laugh, her quiet presence, the way she'd looked at Mateo like she'd known him forever, it all felt too distant now, like trying to hold water in your hands. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He ignored it at first, assuming it was a work alert or a reminder for a delivery he'd agreed to pick up later. But the screen lit again, and when he finally reached for it, Jesse froze. "Claire Bennett, thank you again for yesterday. It meant more than you know." A second bubble popped up almost immediately, like she hadn't let herself think too hard before sending it. If you and Mateo are free, would you want to grab lunch today? My treat. No roller coasters this time. Just burgers. Jesse stared at the screen, thumb hovering, brain catching up with his chest, which had already started to beat a little faster. She hadn't vanished. He read the message again, not missing the careful tone, the hesitation. She hadn't assumed. She'd asked. After everything, her background, the phone call, the fireworks, she was still reaching out. Not as the girl from the boardroom, not as the woman who bought a car like it was gum at the register. But as Claire. He smiled, small and involuntary. And then he typed back. Mateo's favorite lunch spot is Jerry's Diner. Noon? 3 dots danced on the screen. Then, perfect. See you both there. For the first time in days, Jesse felt like maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. The bell above the shop door gave its usual hollow jingle as Jesse stepped inside. The familiar scent of motor oil and burnt coffee wrapping around him like a threadbare blanket. The hum of an engine idling in Bay 2, mixed with the clank of tools and the muffled sound of an old radio playing classic rock somewhere in the back. This was home at least the version of it that paid the bills and kept his hands busy, enough to keep his thoughts quiet. Took the weekend off, and came back a changed man. Came a voice from behind the counter. Marcus, his co-worker and part-time comic relief, leaned against the register with a grease rag slung over his shoulder and a smirk already forming. Was that a smile I just saw, Navarro? Jesse rolled his eyes, tossing his keys into the little tray labeled Customer Drop. It's too early for whatever this is. Too early for love stories? Marcus pressed, following him toward the back office. Word around town is you were spotted at the park with a tall, mysterious woman. Cotton candy, fireworks, matching wet t-shirts from the water ride. She bought me a car, Jesse said flatly, setting down his thermos. That shut Marcus up for half a second. She what? Jesse exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It's not what it sounds like. No, because it sounds like you went on one date and came back with a luxury SUV, Marcus said, clearly delighted now. Man, I've been doing it wrong. Jesse gave him a look, but couldn't quite suppress the small, reluctant smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She's different, he said finally. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Different like, has a helicopter, different? Different like, real? Jesse replied, surprising even himself with how true that felt. She didn't care about any of this. He motioned around the garage oil stains, peeling paint, the sound of a ratchet gun echoing off metal. Marcus leaned back, thoughtful for once. Huh. Well, if she comes around again, tell her my truck's been making a funny noise. Maybe she'll buy me lunch. Jesse laughed, shaking his head as he grabbed his work gloves. Back to real life. Wrenches, spark plugs, cheap coffee. But now, there was something else, too. A reason to check his phone. A reason to hope. Jerry's Diner had never seen this much smiling from Jesse Navarro. Not in one sitting, at least. It started with that first lunch, just burgers and small talk in the corner booth, Clare arriving with her sleeves rolled and a tray of milkshakes for good measure. Mateo had launched into a retelling of the roller coaster ride before the ketchup had even been opened, and Clare listened like every second mattered. After that, it became routine, not forced. Not planned, even. But somehow, once a week, turned into twice. Then Clare was waiting at the curb after school with Jesse and Mateo, offering rides when Jesse's schedule ran late or the weather turned sour. And when Mateo's class had their spring open house, Clare showed up uninvited, but welcome, handing Jesse a cup of hot chocolate as they sat on 2 small plastic chairs, watching Mateo show off a macaroni-covered solar system. It felt strange, at first. Not bad. Just new. Jesse had grown used to doing everything solo school forms, late-night fevers, the balancing act between work and being present. He didn't know what to make of someone like Clare easing her way in so gently, so naturally. She never overstepped, never acted like she was entitled to space. She just filled it, where space had been left hollow for too long. Mateo, of course, adored her. His backpack now had 2 compartments, one for school stuff and one for Claire snacks, the little treats she always seemed to have tucked away, like she knew exactly what kind of day he'd had before he even said a word. One Friday afternoon, after pickup, Jessie watched as Claire knelt beside Mateo's science project in the parking lot, helping him reattach a crooked foam planet with tape she'd had in her purse. She looked up, hair windblown, face flushed with laughter. Emergency orbit repair complete. Jessie leaned against the SUV, arms crossed, smiling without meaning to. "You know you don't have to keep showing up like this." Claire stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "I know," she said simply. "That's why I do." And Jessie realized, right then, this wasn't about grand gestures or surprises anymore. This was something else. This was what it looked like when someone chose to stay. It started with a glance, then a double take. And by the end of the week, Jessie couldn't go into the corner store without hearing whispers behind the coffee rack. Claire Bennett had officially become someone in town, and not just because she kept showing up at school events or because Mateo wouldn't stop bragging that Miss Clare makes the best grilled cheese. No, this was different, sharper, recognition. It was old Mrs. Tom, Doherty from the library, who finally said what everyone else was dancing around. Jessie had stopped by to return a stack of children's books when she leaned over the desk, lowering her voice like she was about to tell him someone was dying. "That woman you've been seen with," she said, her eyes narrowing behind thick lenses. "Wasn't she on the cover of Forbes last year?" Jessie blinked. "I wouldn't know." "Well, I would." She tapped her temple with one bony finger. "Bennett. Clare Bennett. The Carr family. She's her, isn't she?" Jessie didn't answer, just offered a polite smile and a mumbled thanks before heading out. But it didn't stop there. At the garage, customers started asking strange questions. At Mateo's school, a few parents lingered longer near drop-off, shooting curious glances toward Claire's car. And Jessie couldn't ignore the look Rick gave him when they crossed paths at the gas station, half smug, half confused, like he couldn't figure out how Jessie, of all people, had ended up next to her. He'd never cared much for small-town gossip. Let people say what they wanted. But now, for the first time in a long time, the weight of other people's eyes felt heavier than usual. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and Claire pulled into the driveway with takeout in hand, Jessie watched her step out of the car confident as ever. No makeup, jeans, and sneakers, like nothing had changed. But things had changed. And Jessie didn't know how to protect what they were building from a town that loved stories too much to leave them alone. He opened the front door before she could knock. "They know," he said quietly. Claire gave him a soft smile, the kind that said she already expected it. "Then let them talk." The elevator ride was silent glass walls, revealing a skyline Jessie had only ever seen from below, all steel and privilege stretched high into the clouds. He shifted uncomfortably in his jacket, wondering for the 100th time if his boots were leaving scuff marks on the polished marble floors. The air up here even smelled different, like expensive wood and filtered confidence. Claire stood beside him, calm as ever, watching the city pass beneath them with the quiet ease of someone used to seeing the world from above. "This is your place?" Jessie asked, voice low, as the elevator slowed to a smooth stop on the top floor. She looked at him and nodded. "I don't stay here often anymore. But, yeah, it's mine." The doors opened, and Jessie stepped into a space that felt more like a luxury showroom than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the open floor plan, spilling golden sunset light across spotless hardwood floors and sleek, minimalist furniture. Every surface gleamed. Every object had a place. And somehow, it all felt cold. Claire set her purse on a stone countertop and kicked off her shoes like this was the most ordinary space in the world. "There's coffee in the kitchen, or wine if you'd rather pretend we're fancier than we are." Jessie walked slowly through the space, his eyes catching on details, a row of high-end coffee table books that had probably never been opened. The kind of artwork you needed a gallery guide to understand. A fireplace that turned on with a remote. He paused at the far wall, where a photo of Claire's family hung in a glossy black frame. Her smile in the picture was familiar, but the eyes, they looked tired. "Performed. This place doesn't look like you," he said finally, turning back to her. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him. "That's because it isn't." He studied her for a long moment, the woman who fit just as easily into a school drop-off line as she did a penthouse. She didn't belong to either world completely, and maybe that's why she made sense in his. "You sure you're not slumming it with me?" he asked, only half joking. Claire stepped closer, something soft flickering in her eyes. "No," she said. "I'm finally breathing with you." The ride back from the penthouse was quiet too. Quiet. The kind of silence that settled, not because there was nothing to say, but because the things that needed saying didn't quite know how to come out yet. Jesse kept his eyes on the road, hands tight around the steering wheel. The glow from the dashboard cast faint shadows across his face, but the tension was written all over, him jaw clenched, posture stiff, like he was bracing for something he couldn't name. Claire sat in the passenger seat, legs crossed, fingers gently tapping against her knee. She hadn't said much since they left. Neither had he. It wasn't until they turned off the main highway, the city lights fading behind them, that Jesse finally spoke. "Your world," he said, not looking at her. "It's a million miles from mine." Claire shifted in her seat, her voice soft but steady. "It doesn't feel like that when I'm with you." "Well," he muttered, "it did to me." The words landed heavier than he meant them to. He let out a slow breath, trying to untangle the thoughts pressing on him since he stepped into that penthouse, polished floors, curated artwork, a fireplace you didn't even need to light. It wasn't that it intimidated him. It was that it reminded him, in every corner, of all the places he didn't fit. "I don't want to be the guy you visit when you want to feel grounded," Jesse added, eyes still on the road. "I don't want to be your break from that world. That's not a real place to stand." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm not trying to escape my life by being with you, Jesse. I'm trying to rebuild it, with the parts that actually mean something." He glanced at her, just briefly, as the road dipped into familiar turns. "And if the parts don't fit?" She looked out the window, the reflection of passing streetlights flickering across her face. "Then maybe it's time I stopped pretending they ever did." The car fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full with questions, with uncertainty, and with the quiet ache of two people trying to figure out if love could stretch across a line they never meant to draw. The silence didn't come all at once. It started as missed calls, a few unanswered texts. Then the absence grew louder, like an echo in a house that had once been filled with voices. Jesse kept his phone face down on the kitchen counter, refusing to check it even when it buzzed with something meaningless. Claire hadn't reached out since that night, the drive back from the penthouse, the sharp edge in their words, the quiet that followed. And he hadn't tried, either, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what to say, or how to say it without sounding like a man who'd already convinced himself he didn't belong. Mateo noticed right away. "Did Miss Clare go somewhere?" he asked one evening, pushing peas around his plate with a plastic fork. Jesse glanced up from his lukewarm dinner. "She's just busy, bud." The lie felt bitter in his mouth, but he didn't have anything else to give. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that grown-up feelings are like car engines, easy to flood, hard to fix? Mateo didn't ask again, but his questions showed up in other ways. He lingered at school drop-off, eyes scanning the sidewalk. He checked the front window when Jesse got home from work, hopeful for a second car in the driveway. And that night, when Jesse tucked him in, Mateo whispered, "I liked it better when she came around." Jesse sat on the edge of the bed, hand ruffling his son's hair. "Me too, kid." The days passed slowly. Jesse threw himself into work, taking on extra shifts at the shop, fixing broken timing belts and replacing tires with more force than necessary. The laughter that had found its way into their days felt like it had been packed up and stored in a box, waiting for someone to come back and open it. Clare, too, felt the weight. She stared at her phone more than she cared to admit, rereading the last messages, the last words exchanged, the ones that hurt, the ones they didn't say. Neither of them knew how to cross the distance, but both of them felt the ache of what it meant to let something good slip away in silence. Jessie found the letter on the kitchen table, folded carefully in half, and sealed with a crooked heart sticker. It was addressed in Mateo's blocky handwriting, spelled out in uneven pencil strokes. To Miss Clare. He picked it up slowly, like it might break in his hands, and turned it over. On the back, in smaller letters, Mateo had scribbled, "Please give this to her. If she doesn't want to read it, that's okay too." Jessie stood there for a long time, unsure what hit him, harder the hope in the message or the quiet ache behind it. Mateo hadn't asked about Clare in days, but clearly she hadn't left his mind, not even a little. He debated opening it, just a glance, just to make sure it wasn't something too raw, but he didn't. Something about the neatness of the fold, the sticker, the trust behind it, didn't feel like his to read. That night, as Jessie tucked Mateo into bed, he sat a little longer than usual. Mateo stared up at the ceiling, his voice soft in the dark. "Did you see the letter?" Jessie nodded. "I did. Do you think she'll read it?" He hesitated. "I think she'd want to." Mateo rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket up to his chin. "I didn't write about the fight, just the good stuff, like the carousel, and the water ride, and the milkshakes." Jessie smiled faintly. "That's what matters most." The next day, after dropping Mateo off at school, Jessie drove out of habit not toward the garage, but toward the edge of town, where the skyline began to rise. He didn't text, didn't call, just parked outside Clare's building and sat with the letter in his lap, the heart sticker catching the sunlight. After a moment, he stepped out, crossed the lobby, and handed the letter to the front desk attendant with a quiet, "It's for Clare Bennett." Then he walked away, hoping that somehow one boy's simple words might reach where his own hadn't. Because sometimes the most honest things come from the smallest voices, and this time Jessie hoped Clare was listening. It was nearly dusk when the knock came. Soft, hesitant, just loud enough to be heard over the hum of the evening, but not so bold as to demand attention. Jessie looked up from the sink, dish towel in hand, unsure for a moment if he'd imagined it. Mateo was in his room, humming to himself as he worked on a puzzle, and the house was otherwise still. He wiped his hands, heart kicking into gear before his mind caught up. When he opened the door, she was there. Clare. Wind in her hair, eyes uncertain, one hand clutching a slightly crumpled envelope, Mateo's letter against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Hey," she said softly. Jessie leaned against the doorframe, unreadable. "Hey." "I read it," she said, holding the letter up a little. "Every word, twice." He didn't answer right away, just studied her no-polished penthouse version tonight. Just Clare in a hoodie, sneakers and jeans. Still beautiful, but softer somehow, real. "I didn't know if I should come," she continued. "But the truth is, I didn't want to let this end with silence. Not with you, not with Mateo." Jessie looked down at the letter in her hand, the little heart sticker still clinging to the paper. "He misses you," Clare's voice wavered. "I miss him, and you, even if I messed it up." She took a breath, stepping forward, eyes meeting his. "I've spent most of my life being careful, being smart, making the right choices, the ones that looked good on paper. But with you?" She swallowed. "It didn't feel like a plan. It felt like a life, and I'm terrified of how much I want that." Jessie's expression softened, the walls he'd spent the week building starting to crack. "I don't know if I belong in your world," he said quietly. "Then let's build one that belongs to both of us," Clare said. No names, no noise, just us. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jessie stepped aside, the door open, his silence saying more than any words could. Clare walked in, letter still in hand, hope in her eyes. And for the first time in days, the house felt full again. The next morning didn't feel like a grand new beginning. There were no sweeping declarations, no cinematic kisses in the rain. Instead, Jessie made coffee in the same chipped mug. Clare sat on the couch, still wearing yesterday's hoodie, and Mateo wandered out of his room with sleep-tousled hair and a hopeful grin when he saw her. "Is she staying for pancakes?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Jessie looked at Clare. Clare looked at Jessie. "I could eat," she said with a shrug. That was how it began again. Quietly, imperfectly. Not like something out of a storybook, but like something real, something worth the effort. They didn't talk about the future that day. No labels, no pressure. Jessie flipped pancakes while Clare helped Mateo find the missing piece to his puzzle. She spilled syrup on the table. He rolled his eyes but handed her a napkin. And somewhere in between the mess and the laughter, the sharp edges between them started to soften. Rebuilding wasn't romantic. It was clumsy. Some mornings Jessie said too little, unsure how much of his life he was allowed to share. Some evenings Clare stayed too quiet, unsure if she was taking up too much space in a home that had run on routine and survival for years. But they tried. Clare began to show up not just for the fun moments, but for the ones in between. Grocery runs, soccer practice, loading the dishwasher after dinner. She asked questions. Jessie answered, eventually. And when the world got too loud, they sat on the porch and said nothing at all. Jessie no longer waited for her to disappear. Clare no longer felt like she had to prove she belonged. They were still different, didn't always understand her polished past, and she sometimes struggled to fit into his unvarnished present. But what they were building wasn't about blending perfectly. It was about choosing, every day, to stay. Not because it was easy, but because for the first time, they both knew it was real. The evening was quiet, the kind of stillness that settled after a long, good day. Jessie and Clare sat on the porch swing, a blanket draped loosely over their legs, Mateo fast asleep inside. The stars above were faint but visible, flickering like small promises in the dark. Clare sipped her tea, her head resting lightly against Jessie's shoulder. "You ever think about what we could do with this?" she asked softly. Jessie looked down at her. "With what?" "This," she said, gesturing lazily to the house, the porch, the silence. "All of it. What we've built. The fact that somehow, after everything, we ended up here with a second chance." Jessie tilted his head. "You mean like us?" Clare smiled. "Us, yes. But I mean something bigger too." She sat up a little, her voice gaining a spark of energy. "I've been thinking, what if we created something for people like us? Like you. Families who've been through hell and just need a day of joy. A break. A little magic." Jessie furrowed his brow, intrigued. "Like a nonprofit," she continued. "Local, personal, no corporate gloss, just real moments for people who need them. Park tickets, family nights, surprise meals, car repairs even." He raised an eyebrow. "Car repairs, huh? Well," she said, nudging him playfully, "I happen to know a guy." Jessie chuckled, but his expression turned thoughtful. "That actually sounds incredible." Clare turned to face him fully, the porch light casting a soft glow on her features. "Think about it, Jessie. What if the day you thought would break you, the day you got humiliated at that dealership, could be the reason someone else doesn't have to feel that way?" Jessie stared at her, heart full. Not because of the plan, but because this was the woman sitting beside him. Not just kind, not just generous, but someone who saw pain and turned it into purpose. "You'd really want to do this?" he asked. "With me?" Clare reached for his hand. "I don't want to do it without you." And just like that, a new dream was born, not polished, not perfect, but shared. And that made all the difference. Snow had dusted the town overnight, blanketing rooftops and softening the edges of the streets like powdered sugar over something already sweet. Christmas was still a week away, but the spirit had settled in early storefronts, twinkled with lights, and carols played on repeat through crackling speakers. Jessie had just finished salting the front walk when Claire pulled into the driveway, her breath fogging up the windshield as she waved through the glass. "Morning!" she called as she stepped out, cheeks flushed from the cold. Jessie wiped his hands on his flannel and met her halfway. "You're chipper," she grinned. "I've got something." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" Claire held up a small envelope with a red bow taped to it. "Only if you hate snow cabins, hot cocoa, and watching your kid lose at board games." He blinked, slowly taking the envelope. "What is this?" "A surprise," she said. 3 nights, just the 3 of us. Nothing fancy, just cozy. Mateo's off school. You can miss a few days at the shop. I already cleared it with Marcus." "You what?" Claire smirked. "I have my ways." Jessie opened the envelope, eyes scanning the simple booking confirmation. A quiet cabin by the lake, fireplace included, no Wi-Fi mentioned. Peace. Just peace. He looked up at her, a little stunned. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said gently. "Not everything I give has to come with a price tag, Jessie. Sometimes it's just about making space for people I care about." His throat tightened, but he nodded. "Well, I guess that makes 2 of us." He stepped back inside the house, returning moments later with a small wrapped box. Uneven tape job, rough edges. But his hands held it like it mattered. Claire looked at him, surprised. "You got me something?" "Made," he corrected. "Not bought." Inside was a hand-carved wooden keychain, a tiny replica of the SUV she'd given him. The letters CB+MN etched subtly on the back. Claire stared at it for a long moment, her fingers running over the grooves. "This," she whispered, "is perfect." And for once, neither of them had anything clever to say. They just stood there, in the soft falling snow, hearts full, hands warm, knowing they'd already found the best gift of all. The gates of Everbright Park shimmered under a canopy of winter lights. Strings of gold and white twinkling through the trees like stars had decided to visit for the season. Music floated through the air, familiar carols, laughter, the hum of roller coasters running slower now but still alive with energy. It had been months since they were last here, but somehow it felt like stepping back into a memory. This time, though, everything was different. This time, they were together. Claire held one of Mateo's hands, Jessie the other, the boy in between them grinning wide enough to make his cheeks hurt. He wore a puffy jacket, a snowflake-patterned beanie pulled down over his ears, and a candy cane already sticking out of one pocket. "I remembered where the carousel is," Mateo said, tugging both of them toward the glowing ride just up the hill. Claire laughed. "Of course you did. I think it's part of your internal GPS." They walked slowly, savoring the moment. The lights danced around them, and everything, the sound, the chill, the joy felt, wrapped in something tender and warm. Halfway to the carousel, Mateo stopped walking. He turned and looked up at them. Face thoughtful now, voice quieter than usual. "Can I tell you something?" Jessie and Claire both knelt instinctively, leaning close. "I know you 2 were scared at first," he said seriously. "But I always kinda wanted this." Claire tilted her head. "Wanted what, bud?" Mateo's eyes flicked between them, shining in the light. "For us to be a family." The words hit Jessie like a soft punch to the chest. Claire's eyes welled up immediately, her hand tightening gently around Mateo's. "I mean," Mateo added, sheepish now, "I didn't want to ask, 'cause I didn't want to mess anything up, but I kinda wished it." Jessie pulled him in, arms wrapping around him in a strong, silent hug. Claire rested her hand on the back of Mateo's head, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't mess anything up, sweetheart. You helped build it." Mateo looked between them again, this time with a proud little smile. "Can we ride the carousel now?" They laughed, standing together, their hands joined once more. And as the music swelled and the ride lights spun, Claire and Jessie knew this wasn't a wish anymore. This was real. The morning was crisp. The kind of cold that made breath visible and cheeks pink, but the sunlight poured through the trees like it had waited all winter to shine just for them. Everbright Park stood ahead, Gates wide, music playing, and laughter already rolling out in waves from inside. But this time, Jesse wasn't counting the dollars in his wallet. He wasn't checking his watch, or wondering if they could afford the snack booth. There was no weight in his shoulders, no silence between him and his son. This time, he wasn't alone. Clare stood beside him, hand in his, her smile easy and warm despite the frost in the air. On her other side was Matteo holding both their hands now, proudly, confidently, like he knew exactly where he belonged. They walked together toward the Gaetano hesitation, no whispered plans, just 3 sets of footsteps and the kind of comfort that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. A worker at the booth glanced up as they approached. 3 today? 3, Jesse said. Clare pulled out the tickets she'd already ordered online, but Jesse stopped her gently, reaching into his own coat pocket. He held up 3 passes, already printed and ready. "My turn," he said with a small smile. Clare's eyes softened. No protest, just quiet understanding. They stepped through the turnstile together. Inside, the park buzzed with life. Music, colors, joy. Families wandered past, kids ran with sticky hands, couples shared cocoa. And somewhere near the heart of it all was the carousel, the same one where laughter first cracked the walls between them. They returned to it now not as strangers, not as 2 broken people searching for a little light, but as something whole, something chosen. As they stood in line, Matteo leaned his head against Jesse's arm. "This is going to be the best ride." Clare looked over at Jesse, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feels like everything started here." Jesse glanced down at her, hand tightening around hers. "No," he said. "Everything changed here. We started the moment we decided not to walk away." The carousel turned slowly ahead of them, music spilling into the air like a promise. And this time, they didn't step forward alone. They stepped forward together.